Ciao friends! In this session, I will introduce the group by columns property that we can apply to columns in a table in a Power BI or a tabular model. This property can be used to establish how to uniquely identify values that have the same value in a column but actually represent different entities. Imagine the city that could be different depending on the state and the country, or the customer name. You could have multiple customers with the same name, but they are actually different customers. I will compare the group by columns with another feature, which is keep unique rows, that can be used in a subset of these cases, like the customer name, for example. And we will see also the limitations of these features. In particular, the fact that Excel cannot be used when these features are active, or at least there are limitations in what you can do in Excel if you consider to adopt these features. We will also see how to use them in Power BI to achieve particular goal. For example, imagine you have a slicer and you want to store in the report the selection made in the slicer, but instead of storing the description of the selection, you want to store an internal identifier. This is exactly what the feed parameters do, thanks to this feature, but we have to understand what are the elements inside this feature that can make this happen, because if you don't control this the right way, you might obtain wrong results. So let's start with a demo. The problem that group by columns aims to solve is the problem of having a column that represents different entities even though it has the same name. And the first example we show is the customer name. Actually, the customer name is something we can solve without using group by columns, as I will show you in a moment. So in this report, we have the customer name in the rows, and we have two measures, sales amount and sales divided by customer. Sales divided by customer is just a measure that divides the sales amount by the number of customers, and the number of customers is a measure that uniquely count the number of unique customers that have sales in that selection. What does it mean? It means that if I have for every row a single customer, the two numbers should be the same, and they are for almost all of these customers but the first one. The first one has different values. Why? Because there are multiple customers with the same name. Now, in order to show just a limited list of customers, we applied a filter on this page, filtering those customers that starts with David H, so that we limited the number of customers visible here. Now, in order to understand whether this customer is just a customer that has this customer name has multiple customers, we can include the customer key. Once we include the customer key, we can see that there are different customers with the same name. But how can we produce a report where we see 3 rows with the same customer name? Because if we want to sort by, for example, sales amount, it would be important to not have a cumulated value of multiple customers in a single name. Of course, one solution is to change the name column so that we include the customer key, for example. That is a solution. But from an aesthetic point of view in the report, we might not like it. So what can we do at this point? Well, one solution is, instead of looking at the group by columns, which is a feature that I will introduce later, we can actually use keep unique rows property. Now, the keep unique rows property is a property that we can use to say the name column of the table customer is uniquely identified by the identity of the table. What is the identity of the table? Let's take a look at the customer table in Power BI. The Power BI diagram view, when you select a table, like for example, now I selected customer. When I select customer, you see that there is a property, key column, that you can select with any of the columns of the table, assuming that that column is unique for the entire table. There is a check made when you assign this property, and this check becomes a constraint for future refreshes of the model. By default, this property is not set. This property is set when you explicitly say, okay, I want this column to be the key column. Pay attention that the fact that customer key is part of a one-to-many relationship already make the customer key unique. But this doesn't mean that customer key is also the key of the table. You have to explicitly set this property. Once you do that, you see that only one column can have this key state to true, and this is displayed by this icon. When you see this icon, it means that that column is the key column of the table. So we see that this property is a property at the table level. In reality, if we go to Tabular Editor and we open in Tabular Editor the same model and we look at the property of the table, let's start with the property of the table, you will find that there is no key column here. The key column is actually a property that is set at the column level. You see the customer key is bold. It's bold because it is key, and it is key because the key column of this, the key property of this column, key, is true. So in the Power BI UI, you set the key attribute at the table level because only one column can be key. But in the tabular model, there is a key property at the column level and only one column in the table can be true. This is how it works from a tabular perspective. Now, when this is true, you can do a second step because this was already true and it was not displaying different customers with the same name. But if I go to the customer name property and I look at this other property, keep unique rows, once you set one key column in a table, you can apply keep unique rows to other columns of the same table. When you set this property to true, you are saying there are, let's see if I can change this. You see that now I set this to true. Now I'm saying there are as many unique values of the name column as the number of rows in the table. So if there are 3 rows with the same name, you will continue to display 3 rows. You have to keep unique rows for product name. Let's see if it works. I save this and I go back to Power BI. I go back to my report and all of a sudden you see that now I see my customer, David Hall, that has 3 rows. We can remove the customer key now and we see always these 3 rows. What is happening is interesting from a DAX perspective. Let's see what is the DAX code generated for this matrix. If I copy the query, the DAX query for this matrix in the clipboard, and I paste this code in DAX Studio, we can see that even though we didn't display the customer key, because I removed the customer key from the report, nevertheless, the customer key is included whenever we have customer name. So customer name and customer key are always bundled together in any report, and this makes customer name unique in Power BI. Because in Excel, unfortunately, this is not supported. Let's see what happens if I publish this model to Power BI service and I connect Excel to the Power BI dataset. So I simulate this with Analyzing Excel that connects Excel directly to my local Power BI instance. I include sales amount and sales by customer. I include the customer name in the filters because I want to filter David H. And let's enable multiple items. And I enable these customers. Now, I cannot use the same column in a pivot table in the filter in the rows. So in order to see what is happening, I use this name unique in the rows of the pivot table, because this way, name unique is the column that we created in the download file that you can download from the article, because this way we have all the examples in a single file. So I now changed the property, but name unique is identical to my current name. Name unique has the keep unique rows set to true. So if I use name unique in the rows, you see that even though this column has the keep unique rows set to true, and this column is producing in Power BI a result that has a different row for each row of the customer, in Excel, this is not supported. So in Excel, you will continue to see a single value for this customer, a single row for this customer. So this is how keep unique rows work. Now I said there is another way another tool, another system we can use, which is group by columns, which is the topic for this video. So in order to introduce group by columns, let's move to an example in Power BI where this could be useful, because actually in Power BI, keep unique rows work. It's just Excel that is not supported. City. If I include the city is unique if I consider country, state, and city. But if I look at the city alone, I'm not sure that there is only one Portland. I mean, there could be multiple Portland in different states and different countries. How can I know the same for the other cities? Now, if I include country and state, I can see that actually there are, let's go here, there are different cities, different Portland cities, and different Portsmouth cities in the United States, also in Australia for Portland. Which means that how can we obtain the behavior we have seen before with the city? One option could be, because they keep unique rows, only work with the identity of the table, we should create a table with the cities. But if we do that, then it would be impossible to have all the attributes, including continent, country, state, and city, within the customer. I should create another table, and this would be confusing for the user. So we want to keep all the attributes of the same business entity into the same table because it's the way Power BI works. So with group by columns, we have an option. With group by columns, we can say, look, whenever the user select the city, you have to include also country and state. And group by columns does exactly that. Let's try. So if I go back, so let me restore the report this way. So now sorry, not this one. I want the city. Okay. Now we have only 3 rows, right? Now I go back to tabular editor and I go to the city column. And in the city column, I open the property group by columns. In group by columns, I can select one or more columns that uniquely identify that value. Actually, these columns, from a DAX standpoint, are columns that have to be always included together with the column that you query in order to get unique values. So I select customer country, press Control, so I can do a multiple selection, state. Okay, I have the confirmation that I selected 2 columns, and I can move forward. At this point, just because I selected these 2 columns, I save these changes to my model, and now I go back to Power BI. And all of a sudden, if you remember last time I left Power BI, there were only 3 rows. Now there are many rows because I have 1 row for each unique Portland that exists in my database. This is exactly what I wanted. Why this is working? Because if we look at the DAX code, and we do the same operation we did before, we copy the query for the table, and we go back to DAX Studio. I paste the code in DAX Studio, and we can see that we selected the city, but Power BI added customer and country. Same here, customer state, customer country, because I selected customer city. Even though I don't see country and state are used as grouping columns in the query, and so we have as many cities as a combination of country, state, and city we have in the model. What about Excel? It doesn't work. So, but it doesn't work in a different way. Let's open this in Excel. So I go in Excel, I duplicate this pivot table. You never know, I may want to go back here later. And I use now the city, the customer city. And if I use the customer city, instead of having the wrong result, now I have an error. And the error says city is part of a composite key, so it must be included with those keys. Which means that it is not actually stopping me from seeing the city, it is just telling me, without telling me which columns are missing, it is telling me that there are other columns needed to show the city. Now I know that if I include the country and the state, I can also include the city. And as you see, if I include, if I include these, so let's remove this from the filter. Maybe I had to remove the filter at all, it's easier. If I include the city together with the state and the country, it works. And if I include if I apply a filter to the city, for example, I search a port, Let's remove everything and let's start with just Portland. Here we go. These 3 cities. As you see, it is working as I was expecting, because I see that there are different Portlands, but I'm forced to use country and state. If I try to remove the country or the state, bang, error. So I am not able to create a report if I don't comply with the restrictions I applied. You might say that it is better because, of course, if you just provide a hierarchy with country, state, and city, it just works. And you make sure that the user will never see a city that is the aggregation of multiple cities in different parts of the world. So this could be something that you can use. But, of course, you have to think about, are you able to instruct the users to understand the error message, or you can just try to remove the visibility of the column that could produce that message if it is used alone. But before closing, there is another detail that is important, because what I did now works, but is not completely correct. Let me explain you why. Let's say that I create a slicer and I put the city in the slicer. Okay. Let's just increase the font because we want to use a larger font, and let's use 20 and 24. Okay, so now we have the list of the cities, just like the table we have on the left. And let's select just the first 2 Portland cities. It just works, right? But the problem is that the slicer does not store as a filter the city. It is storing only the 2 group by column. So when I selected these 2 Portland cities, I'm selecting actually the combination of country and state. And the reason why it is working in the matrix and it is showing also only the cities Portland is because I have also this page filter. Let me try to explain. Let's remove this filter. Okay, now I have no filters. I see all the cities. So far, so good. Now let's go to our Portland city, just because it's the one that I remember, so I have to scroll down a little bit. And I want to select Portland when I have the list in the slicer. I see the city Portland. And remember, I do this just because I'm sure that there are 5 Portland cities available. Okay, Portland. Here we go. Okay, I select the first one. I don't know where it is, but if I select the first one, I see a list of cities. If I select the second one, I see another list of the cities. If I select the third one, I see another list. What is happening? Well, what is happening is that when I select Portland, the first one, there is one city, Portland. But actually, there are many other cities. In order to understand what is happening, we have to include the country and the state. Now you see that these cities are all in the United States and Maine. So what is happening is that I selected the first Portland. The first Portland clearly is United States, Maine, Portland. And this selection of United States and Maine alone is the only selection that is propagated to the matrix. So you see Portland, you select Portland, but you actually filter the country and the state where Portland is, which is absolutely non-intuitive. So even though from a DAX standpoint, the group by columns defines which columns should be added to the query to make the query valid, the interpretation of Power BI is slightly different. Power BI consider group by columns an alternative way to identify the value, which means that if you want to identify a city, you have to include the city name. But because you cannot include the same column in the group by columns, you have to include either the city code or another column that has a copy of the city name, which is what I did in the model. So if in the model that you download, you will find 2 columns city. Let's see if I can highlight this. You will find 2 columns city. The first one doesn't have group by columns. The second one has, as group by columns, country, state, and city. The city without unique. So if I click city unique, you see that group by columns has 3 columns, which includes not the customer address. So sorry, this is just a bug of the current version of Tabular Editor that shows the first element selected by default, but actually what I selected are just these 3 values, city, country, and state. And so whenever you select a city, these 3 values are selected and put in the filter, which is important because this means that when I let's say, save this file, the selection you made in the report is saved in the report state. And when the report is opened, instead of using the original value that you selected, the group by columns is used instead. So group by columns can be used in another case. Imagine you have a product description, but when you select a product description, you want to save the product code. Because next time you open the report, if the product description changed, you still want to select that product based on the code, even though you displayed the name. You can using group by columns, because group by columns says to the slicer object, store the keys for this element, not the attribute. So even though from a DAX standpoint, the interpretation of group by columns should have been a little bit different, in reality, what we can do today is to, in Power BI, is to use group by columns as a composite key that uniquely identify the element that we are displaying. So this could be useful for your report, but remember, it is not supported in Excel, or at least from the Excel standpoint, Excel doesn't know that, so you manually have to include the columns that define the composite key so that you never show in the report a combination that aggregates different cities from different states, because this will produce a value that is not considered acceptable by the restrictions that we define by using the group by columns property. So we have seen a number of features. Keep unique rows and group by columns are useful to solve a particular common problem, which is having the same name for different entities, and the desire of having these entities separated in the report no matter what, no matter the selection made by the user. Unfortunately, these features don't work well in Excel, even though they are supported in Power BI, and you still have to pay attention, especially when you use group by columns, about the fact that you should include a unique identifier for the entity, for example, the city, instead of just relying on additional columns to uniquely identify the different cities, because otherwise, we have seen the slicer could not work well. So keep in mind, pay attention to how these features work. If you want to use them, review the video and maybe look at the details in the article. There are many more details you have to pay attention to. As usual, enjoy DAX.